sharing this chair. Tanya and I were talking this morning on the bus about how awesome it is that we get to be in this room with these incredibly brilliant, articulate people who've been doing the hard work for a very, very long time. And I have appreciated, in the spirit of the room and in the spirit of our industry, the level of mentorship. And it makes me aware that if I'm feeling like the young mentee at the table, I'm getting kind of long in the tooth. And so I'm thinking that there probably should be people younger than me to represent the younger generation, because it is sort of amazing to just say, I'm going to sit next to you and hear about how you build institutions, and please just talk to me about that forever. And so that's the first thing. The other thing that I noticed and am sort of trying to grapple with is where discussions of aesthetics work their way into these conversations. And I think that also has to do with having younger and more artists around the table, but also deciding that the discussion of aesthetics is as important to that what we do and how we do it speaks as largely to what happens in the world of theater and the creation of new work as the way it gets administrated. I think that's so important, and I think there is a disconnect. And finally, something really that moved me and shook me happened on the day that Diane Rodriguez, in the discussion of diversity and where can we find a bright spot, said so movingly, I don't see one. And I continue to be discouraged and confounded by how long that conversation has happened, and how little I see things changing. And I keep turning to August Wilson as the model for someone who articulated it really very well in a way that a lot of us kind of said, yeah, what you're saying, absolutely. But the statistics haven't changed much. And so I keep thinking, is there a level of genuineness? Is there a point at which we have to acknowledge that some of our institutions we don't want to change or something? Because otherwise I can't figure out how so many brilliant people can't figure out how to make like the demographic of the audience reflective of the demographic of the city. And so I say that from a place of feeling very young and very old and embittered simultaneously around this discussion. And when we went to the breakout session of the discussion, I also thought, and the other problem is that it's the same people bringing it up. So if, the same 5 people of color scream diversity into the wind, and then 5 white people say, you are so right and you articulated that so well, maybe the 5 white people can be the first people to scream that to their peers, and that would be most effective. So these are some of the things that I've been thinking about.
Thanks, Lydia. Shay?
This is Shay Waver. We had an interesting conversation about diversity and how it's important for each institution and organization to define what diversity means. Diversity is not just black and white. It's broader than that. I mean, when you work in a all-black institution and you have to fill out the government form about diversity, what do you put on there? And we know that the intent of the form was to look at race and maybe economic and maybe a community. And I remember working in these organizations, and you were challenged then to identify how many non-black board members you had or non-black audience members you had. And I think that, I mean, it's such a charged and fueled, conversation, but I think that we have to look at it beyond race. And I think there's a responsibility for every organization, whether, regardless of your size and composition, to define what that means for you. Because it's a diversity in aesthetic, it's a diversity in age, it's a diversity in community, it's diversity on all levels. So I hope that the conversation elevates beyond just race, because then it takes culturally specific organizations off the table, and there are we have some responsibilities in diversifying aspects that are things that are happening within our organization. To quote Pete Miller again, you think you've been the most quoted man at this conference, but he brought up an interesting point when we were talking about partnerships, and he said, exploring the value of living in the maybe space, that every partnership doesn't have to end with yes, we're going to work with you, or no, we're not going to work with you, but having the time and having the capacity and the resources to court a relationship with an artist, living in the maybe space. And I guess, Howard, you guys have received some resources to do that. Am I misquoting you? No?
Oh, yeah, that's right. We used a little bit of money to just, because we're not in New York, to invite, or because it's a big country, to invite people from New York,
just to get to know you,
direct playwrights, directors, just say, come get to know us for a couple of days.
Well, I thought that was just so phenomenal and creative, and more people should have the opportunity to do that. And then in terms of, it was one other, well, Neil, you already brought up this, I won't elaborate on it, but with the individual artists who were in some of our breakout sessions and their lack of knowledge and understanding about the presenting world was just very stark and startling, and particularly playwrights and theater artists. They had no idea the value and what resources and possibilities existed within the presenting world. So that was very just eye-opening for me.
Great. Jack, we said we were going to skip you, but I don't think I can, so.
No. And I found why Polly Carl is, Dr. Polly Carl is, she actually was able to help synthesize what we've synthesized here, and just asking the question about how the way artists work can be woven into the way how institutions are run. And I think that was a question that sort of made its way into all the various conversations, not just the artist institution one. And then in the abundance issue, there was several times where the question was asked, is this a snapshot in time of abundance? Is something going to come that will take the work that brought us to today in 5 years from now, or 10 years, that abundance will have been replaced by what other something du jour has been, or will we be able to keep this going? One of the more interesting things on our diversity topic was it was suggested that it's a bit of a self-indictment of the field to be discussing diversity of process and style with race and culture as though it was one conversation. And then there was the disconnect between devisers, playwrights, and producing institutions that needs to be bridged. When we got to those breakout sessions, there were just these big gaps of silence where people just weren't engaged in participating. The question of where's audience in the equation of this week's discussion, I think, kept coming up. And one of the most interesting things to me is a playwright pulled me aside and said in some confidence, would it be heresy if I said I don't think collaboration is necessarily a good idea? And I was like, wow, with all that we're talking about this week, that was really a great confession. So those were synthesizing the synthesis.
Great. There's two at the table who haven't spoken.
Okay, I'll jump in.
Yeah, all right.
You guys have taken a lot of my little bullet points here, but that's fine. That was almost my strategy, but it's fine.
I think that's collaboration.
But one thing that did come up, it had to do with the friction and frisson that we came up in a lot of the side conversations, is the artist and institution relationship. And it really, I think it also extends to audiences, and this idea of truth and transparency about who are we really serving, what really and truly is our mission, and I think that deals with, and what kind of work is it that I'm really committed to presenting. And I think that deals with aesthetics, and that also deals with what diversity means to this particular organization, and can we have that conversation truthfully and with transparency. And I think that would, and amongst the discussion, what our resolution was is that would ultimately elevate the field in a very different and complex way, so that we aren't having just sort of these surface conversations about diversity, and we keep coming back around. Why do we keep having this conversation? Because I think there's a certain level of permeation that we have not gotten to, complexity. The other conversation, what does it really mean to provide a home for artists? Like, what does that really mean? Is it just about an alignment with an institution where an artist can say, well, this is my home, but how can we go steps further than that? Technology and theater, the conversation that we had in our breakout session. And what was interesting is Amy had brought up the dangers of taking the human voice away, and what that means with the merging of technology and theater, and what does that mean for the human voice? Are we moving away from the purity and the sanctity of what theater is?
Great. Thanks, Camilla. Eric, you want to jump in? And I promise I have at least two things I have to put out there, so but I'll let you go first.